Well, you know, I used to joke that I wanted to get a date with the editor of our high school newspaper, and it was the only way I could meet her. But my parents told me that when I was 10 years old, I sat in front of and off to the side from our television set, and I had made a board with political stickers, and I delivered the election results. I would listen to the journalist on TV, and then I would give those results to my parents as if I were an anchor. So I guess I started very early to enjoy the idea of telling people something that they didn't know. And I really found that to be so intriguing, and the chance to meet people and learn about new things. So when I went to college, I studied that, and I worked while I went to college as a journalist. And I'm not sure if I could do anything else, but I really liked the idea of giving people information. So it started when I was maybe 10 years old. Ooh, that's another question, like which of your children is the favorite, but I can make a choice in this case. I like radio. Radio is the big reach of mass media. It can be done very inexpensively compared to television. We have lights and cameras. And radio, we just need a microphone and a transmitter. It translates very easily to the web now. Web audio is very inexpensive and very popular again. And also, I think as much as I love the written word, and even the visual of television, what an actor in the 1930s in the United States, Orson Welles, once called the theater of the mind. I think you can do so many things with that radio is a favorite. There was an advertising executive who made ads in the 1960s on behalf of radio, and you can hear this, he drains a lake, fills it with hot chocolate, slides a mountain of whipped cream into it, and then, as he says, has the Royal Canadian Air Force fly over, and there's a sound of biplanes, old airplanes, dropping a huge cherry into the middle, and you hear the noise of the airplanes, and you hear the whistle of the cherry falling, and then you're splat into the whipped cream. And you can see this in your mind's eye. And this is before computer-generated images, and then there's a slight pause, and he says, try doing that on television. And that was the essence to me, is that you can bring a story. If we're interviewing on the street, there's the noise behind me, and you don't have to say I'm in a city or I'm in a rural area or close to an airport. You hear that sound. So as a journalist, I can focus in radio on the subject, but if I capture what's called ambient sound, that portrait, that context is painted for me with the sound. So I love radio. I have to admit I'm a fan of all means, but radio is my favorite. Well, social media was made for journalism if journalism wasn't made for social media, because if you think about my favorite kind of communication, what we're doing right now, it's a chance to see you and to see my expressions and my gestures and my emphasis. Very different than just reading the word, where it might come out as my gestures and my, it's a flatness. Now you can use tricks of the trade and make it better. But I used to say when I was a newspaper editor, all I wanted was pictures on my page that moved. And that's the web, that's social media, and the ability to talk back and forth with readers, to know what they want, to either by virtue of the clicks that they make, and if I'm allowed to track those, I can see where they're going and what they're interested in, but they can also send me a note, they can chat, they can comment instantly on what I'm doing. With today's metrics, even as I'm publishing, I see whether it's popular or not. I can see how many clicks, how are people staying on it. So I think it's made journalism a lot more responsive. I think it's a partner, not an opponent of journalism. I think some journalists are frightened by it, and no, we just have to get past that. It's a partner of ours now, and we should use those elements to our advantage where we can. Well, the main challenge traditional media faces is being traditional media. They have to, in my mind, keep the, this isn't my original phrase. The man who started USA Today, Al Newhart, used to say this: is you keep the best and get rid of the rest. And so I think what we have to do with the strengths of traditional media, the credibility, the institutional memory of having people cover subjects for a long period of time, the ability to have experts on staff, we have to retain that. I think maybe we have to let go of the idea that we're the first people to tell you something, because I can't remember the last time I was told for the first time something important by a newspaper. And I don't mean that as a criticism. It's just that I get a tweet, or my son sends me an email, or one of my alerts from news organizations pops up. Now, notice I said newspapers. News organizations that have a website have the best of all worlds. I find out something's happened right away with a tweet or an alert from the New York Times, and then the next day I read commentary. And that's the next thing that I think we have to get comfortable with, is that we will know, when we no longer tell you, wow, this just happened, we can tell you why. And will it happen again? What did it mean? And how is it going to affect you? And whether we should go back and start over. There are all those kind of context questions. So I think if we keep the best of traditional media, recognize the new opportunities, and let go of some of the other stuff. Why compete with Twitter? I mean, why? I mean, it's an ego thing to say I was first. I'd rather be right, and I'd rather give you something valuable to know about what just happened. And the fact that you knew it, a friend sent you a message, is irrelevant to me now. There was a day, I suppose, when we sold newspapers and you worried about the competition being out there before you, but today we don't sell that way. We sell, I think, credibility and value and information that is of lasting use. So I'd let go of the rest. That's a question we get asked a lot about newspapers in the United States, and I will admit to being of two minds. I think you should never say, oh, never, it'll always be around. I mean, maybe not. But it's still fairly inexpensive, and for certain audiences who may prefer to have something without batteries that's easily used to do not just read but work the crossword puzzle. I know you can do that online, but I still like to do it on paper. And at least as long as I think not just the boomer generation of me, but the millennial generation, the 20-somethings, we still get a sense of the print. It just feels right. And there's a sort of serendipity to turning the page and seeing something I didn't know. I didn't have to ask for it or Google it or have a menu that I chose from. It just turned the page and there it is. And that's still kind of interesting to me. Also, with the exception of Native American smoke signals, which I don't think anybody still uses except in movies and maybe ceremonies, we've never really thrown away a medium. We've always kept it for its remaining best use. And I play a little game sometimes when I do speaking, particularly with students, and I say, what do we still use to tell the most basic information about ourselves for the longest possible period of time? And I wait, and they aren't sure. It's our name and the date we were born and the date that we died. And if you want the world to remember you for nothing more than that, and at least in the United States, we carve it into stone and stick it over the top of our grave. We don't put a grocery list on that anymore. We don't use clay tablets the way the Egyptians would have, But that permanence of hundreds of years with our name and our basic information, born, died. Stone carving still fits the best. You could stick an iPad there, but it's not going to last. You could put it on a piece of wood. You could put it on a clay tablet, but that'll break. So we still use a thick block of stone. And that's the most basic information that we want to last for the longest period of time, and we still use it for that. So I don't know that print will have that same history, but I think it'll be around a long time. Well, as a journalist, I enjoy the protections in the United States of the First Amendment, which protects freedom of press and freedom of expression for a long time. So there's sort of an element of giving back, of saying I enjoyed that for a quarter of a century. I should help protect it. But it goes even deeper, and this was a question I asked recently at a university here in Brazil. Sort of why would you defend free expression at all? I mean, what's the innate value of it? And thanks to that student, I really had to think about it, and I said, it's the way we help each other get better. if you sit back in society and do nothing, how sad to die without ever having helped your fellow man, woman. And the opposite of that then is to use free expression to enter the marketplace of ideas with your idea, whether it's accepted or not, and to collaborate with other citizens freely, without controls or limits set by others, to better the human condition. And that sounds awfully philosophical. But that really is it. I think that you have an obligation to both join in free expression and to defend it, because it is the ultimate mechanism by which we make our societies, whatever the culture, whatever the age, that will make our societies better if we are collaborative rather than antagonistic or simply silent. So I think if you have the opportunity to support it, to encourage it, defend it, you should take that opportunity. And I'm fortunate that I was able to go from a career in which I was using it and protected by the law to an institution that says this is our mission, that we defend freedom of expression. And at the Newseum and the Newseum Instute, which is the program and outreach arm of the Newseum. So I'm very lucky, and I've been able to do that now almost 20 years. And I see threats. I see the economic structure that's damaging journalism, might achieve what no dictator has been able to achieve, and that is to remove journalists from the marketplace of ideas in large numbers. I mean, short term, people have been able to do it with violence or threats or skillful use of law, but if you think about the economic challenges that are everywhere, including now Brazil, that's taking, we've lost half the journalism jobs in America, I think, since 1990. I worry about, you can't do your job if you're not there. And so I want to try to convince owners and publishers that they need to keep as many of those people as they possibly can to do that very important job. That's what we'll have in the 21st century to sell, is knowledge and information and accuracy and credibility. I also think that when we look at free expression writ large, the internet has an irony. The fact that we're able to talk to more people than ever also means more people than ever are listening. And something that might be very acceptable in my culture is absolutely not acceptable in another. And I think it's very important for those of us who have some knowledge of how it could work to try to bring people together to say, that engagement is not endorsement, that a mention is not support or an attack, and that we have to find a way to not eliminate our differences. The world would be a very terrible and dull place without all the richness and diversity of cultures, but to say that there has to be a place of engagement. One of my colleagues calls it the common ground, where we can at least talk about our differences. Maybe we agree to disagree, but we can do it without hatred and some of the violence that has happened as we see things like the Muhammad cartoons, great collision over values in that. There has to be a way to moderate that, and moderate not as in limit, but discuss. And I hope that's something we can do, and maybe colleagues that I'm meeting on this trip will also join in, and maybe are doing already. Some are. Hate speech is the speech you give that I don't like, right? I mean, it's not my. There's a book by a man named Ned Hentoff which says, "Free speech for me, but not for thee." Again, my theory, and it's shaped by my cultural values and the protection of the First Amendment, and I concede that. And also the history in the United States, is to say that the antidote for speech I don't like, hate speech, I don't like hate speech. The antidote to that is more speech, not less. History does tell us that if you try to silence an idea by silencing the speaker, it doesn't work. I mean, you can literally kill the speaker, but you may make them a martyr. Their idea will live on, particularly in the world of the web, where it's, you can't extinguish. It's not like you can burn one book and the idea is gone. It's all over the world instantly. I think that I have no more tolerance for hate speech than anyone else in the sense of my own opinion and attitude. But what I do is tell it to motivate me to speak out in opposition, not to try to silence the speech or make it illegal. So I draw that line as far as possible toward conduct, the immediate, like a true threat of hate, which isn't protected speech in my mind, but that's because it's conduct, it's not speech. Well, you call it out, you point it out, you provide alternative means. And I try not to be naive about this because people die when they oppose governments, or can die. So I'm not trying to say, oh, it'll just be fine, just do this and the world will change. But you know, again, the solution now is very different than it might have been 10 years ago, and that's the web, that's the internet. You know, if I can't publish in a country, I can send that article out and it can be published in another country where my country can't reach. I can collaborate with colleagues around the world now in a way I couldn't before. There's, I think, multiple opportunities now within a country to reach out and report on areas and report about people and to reach out to people that wasn't possible again pre-internet because the means of dissemination was in the hands of a few or maybe controlled by the government. Now, governments are learning to push back. In China, there's a tremendous drain of resources spent on silencing their own citizens and sheltering, it's called the Great Firewall of China, sheltering their own citizens from the internet outside. And we may go through a period where there is a Chinese web. There's no more World Wide Web, or there is, but people don't participate. There's an Islamic web. There's a European web. There's maybe a Brazilian web, if the government so chooses. But I think that the knowledge that there is a broader repository of world information out there will be a tremendous tool to defeat that ultimately. And history says that the game tilts toward freedom. Now it comes at sometimes a terrible sacrifice. It comes at over a long period of time. You know, the Berlin Wall, the sort of ultimate symbol of repression of free speech and free expression, lasted 40 some odd years, 30 some odd years, almost 40 years. Individuals can fight it in countries where they have freedom of speech, but maybe there's an outside factor. In Mexico, the narco organizations, families, whatever, control effectively some of the states, particularly in the Northwest, Northeast. In Pakistan, there was a journalist who once stood and said to me, if I write what I know, I'll be dead. Actually, I had a community journalist in a favela here say, if I take on the narco trade in my favela, I'll be dead. What, Mr. Free Speech guy, what do you do then, huh? You're going to go home to America. And I said to this journalist, community journalist in Rio, and I had said to the journalist in Pakistan, first, I'm inadequate to really respond to your question because I've never had that immediate threat in my life. But if I took a moment to think about it, I would say that you may not be able to publish tomorrow. That you would support freedom of expression today by not speaking, but surviving to be a witness in 5 years, 10 years. At some moment when you can recall those days that you would write about. And let the world know, if not what it is like today, what it was like yesterday. That will have value. There's an expression one of my other mentors, a man named John Siegenthaler, once said, is the process of being free is never complete. It is always in the process of being free. So I think whether you live in a repressive government or a government in the United States, which we have freedom of speech to a great degree, but if I'm summoned to federal court, I have no protection in federal courts for confidential sources. I can be sentenced to jail if I refuse to name them. So are we free or not? Well, that's a fight in the United States. It's very different than a fight in China or in Turkey or in Russia, perhaps even different than here. But it's a fight. So I fight there for that. People fight elsewhere. I think the idea, and again, the web is there now as a sort of safety net to continue to fight, and in the way you can. And that might just mean survival today as opposed to being able to publish today. But I think it's the fight that will matter. And in the 21st century, there may be no more important fight than information and the freedom of information. So I think that's what journalists have to do and what citizens have to do.